Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. It is late in the evening of May 12th, 1862. Charleston Harbor is quiet tonight. The crew of the 7-gun Confederate transport ship CSS Planter have pulled ashore on one of the small uninhabited islands in the harbor, exhausted from a long day transporting food, ammunition, and medical supplies to the various rebel forts that protect the approach to the city. The captain and his men now sit, talk, rest by the fire, eat dinner, and unwind. By 2 a.m. on the morning of the 13th, the fires have died down. The men have returned to their tents, and the only sounds are the whistling of the breeze and the gentle coming of the ocean tides. And the sound of footsteps aboard the deck of CSS Planter. 23-year-old Robert Smalls has been the wheelman of Planter for over a year. He's an experienced pilot who understands the ship and this harbor better than any man who works aboard it. He is tough, dedicated, and extremely competent. He is also enslaved by the Confederacy. And tonight, he and 6 other men are about to take it upon themselves to change that. The men have quietly prepared the ship for departure. And then, when the time comes, the ship's boiler is ignited. The steam engine roars to life. Lines are cut, and the ship is off. The men on the island awake, their shouts fading into the distance as Robert Smalls makes a desperate break for freedom. He has just promoted himself from pilot to captain of the CSS warship Planter, and he has no intention of being captured alive. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here with show producer Andrew Jacobs. And Andrew, I feel like at this point in, you've been on the show enough that you're like a co-host. I feel like I should introduce you as something other than just the producer of the show, even though that is like probably a bigger title. It's you've done, I think
that's a good point. You could probably just say I'm here with Andrew Jacobs.
I'm just here with Andrew. You guys know Andrew.
Yeah. At this point, although I suspect in the coming months as our audience grows, and we'll talk about that more in future episodes, there might need to be some clarification about who some folks are for the new listeners. But for now,
yes.
for our regulars,
right. Well, you do a lot of work for the show because you do as much work for it as I do, maybe more. It's just not really like as public facing, although you're also doing a lot of public facing now too. So you're just kind of
no. I mean, you are the driver. You're the engine of this thing. I'm just
shoveling coal into the steam engine.
Shoveling coal into the steam engine. Yeah, I'm the guy telling you to write one page every day.
Right. Yes, we did have that conversation the other day.
Yeah. But yeah, excited to be here.
Yes, and so here's the transition. We've got a steam engine reference here, which is going to be relevant. We had been talking about people we could write about or talk about on the show. There's, just such a humongous list of characters that we want to talk about, and that would make great stories. I mean, the history is full of amazing, badass stories. And you and I were talking about who we wanted to talk about. And you had said kind of like, do you remember there was like a Facebook thing that was going around for a while, and it was like, why isn't there a movie about this guy? Because he's super badass, and it lists all these things, and you're like, who the heck is this guy? And with no details beyond that, I knew exactly who you were talking about because I had seen those memes as well.
I think everyone has seen those memes.
I think
at
so.
This point.
Yeah, they're like, oh, well, we've got 75 Terminator movies, and they're going to do Alien. They're going to remake Alien and Jurassic Park until we're all dead. But, why isn't there a movie about this guy?
It just goes around like once a year across everyone's Facebook. Then they say, Robert Smalls. Why, he did this, he did this, he did this. Like, why isn't there a movie about this guy? And that's actually a good question. That is a good question.
It is. Because, when you look at the meme, they list, I think it's like 4 or 5 things. You're kind of constricted by size, pixel size when you're trying to organize things into a meme. But it's a very good campaign for him. They do have in 2023, they created a Robert Smalls Day in his home state of South Carolina. And apparently there has been talks about a movie for him since like 2019. So this is just maybe amazing marketing for this movie that has been through several script rewrites, apparently. I don't know. But...
incredible, super viral marketing. Yes. Some Hollywood producer, much smarter and more powerful than me, is pulling off.
exactly. But they got to release the movie now. I think
it's time. They're losing
losing momentum.
But yes, I think it was we needed someone, and it was like, let's finally do that guy.
Let's talk about
everyone's been saying you got to do.
Right, and I get through Badass, through the website, all of that. We have a lot of amazing fans who send us letters and emails and all of this, and it's a picture I get a lot. Why did we talk about this guy? They forward that meme to my Facebook page, or they send it to me through email, and I wrote about him a few years ago, and the story of Robert Smalls is even more exciting. You can't really distill it down into 4 bullet points on a meme. You really can't. This doesn't fit into like the Instagram post. You have to kind of tell this guy's story, because the more you get into it, the more wild it gets, and you just can't distill it down into points.
And I think we were trying to figure out, it's like, okay, it's February. Who are we going to do for February? It is Black History Month, whether you, I guess, choose to celebrate or not. These days.
And it has been. It will continue to be.
But here's the thing about Robert Smalls' story. It's so good. It's so good that it cannot be confined to any day or month or reason. This guy's story is good to tell any day of the week. Any month of the year.
Yes. He is a badass for all seasons. Robert Smalls is an American hero, and he is he's awesome, and his story is great.
Yeah.
He is a guy who faces, the story of badass, and the stories that we like to tell are people who are facing difficult opposition, and they persevere and overcome obstacles, right? This is the message that we want to give with Badass, is like, no matter how bad the odds seem stacked up against you, there is a way. And a lot of times that just involves, powering ahead and trying to bust through these walls and things. And that is a story that is the story of Robert Smalls. He had the odds stacked against him as high as they could possibly be, and he just continually refused to give up and overcame obstacles that were seemingly impossible.
We've really built him up, so now we got to do him justice.
Now we got to deliver, yes. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a really quick break for a commercial here, and when we come back, we are going to tell the story of Robert Smalls, and you're going to want to stick around for this one. Robert Smalls was born into slavery on a large plantation in Beaufort, South Carolina on April 5th, 1839. His mother was an enslaved person, and his father, we don't really know exactly who his father was. There are some guesses that it was the son of the plantation owner, but there is no real evidence pointing to this. Somebody 150 years ago once wrote that maybe it was possible, and so that's kind of how that ends up into history. But we really don't know who Robert Smalls' father was, and he never knew throughout his lifetime. The truth is, it doesn't really matter to the story. He was raised by his mom in the plantation house at the center of the plantation. And she made sure as he was growing up that he got out into the fields as much as possible to witness the true horrors of slavery at this time period. She wanted him to see it firsthand. She was living in the plantation house, which was, I guess, slightly better than being out in the fields. But his mother had been taken from her parents when she was 7 years old and had been relocated to this place. And she didn't want Robert to forget what was going on with this institution and how messed up it was. So he kind of grows up in this world in the South on this plantation, and he can kind of see the injustice that's being done. And
I mean, I think it's worth saying he grows up as a slave, which is,
yeah, he's enslaved.
Which
he's
is
an enslaved
like
person.
I feel like there's this weird thing where a lot of Americans, a lot of our history, we have this picture and image of, the slave trade and slaves being taken from Africa and brought to the U.S. and sold and all that. We don't often think of so many of the people who were born into slavery.
Yeah, he knew nothing else, right? His mother had been born into it. She had been moved away from her parents when she was 7 years old. So like, this is a thing, and it's a thing that's going to come up again in the story where, she was 7 years old, and whoever was, in control of her sold her to somebody else, and she relocated and was all on her own at 7 years old. And she grew up, and she was, when she had Robert, she was like, look, you have to understand what this is all about. And she made a really big point of kind of explaining to him and showing him that this is you're born into it, and this is your life, right? There is no escape. There is no getting out of this. You are an enslaved person, and you will be for as long as you live. Robert Smalls, he didn't like that idea. He didn't like thinking about that. He didn't see that for himself.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And so he is growing up in the plantation house. He has friends that are white, and he is, he's a kid, and he's playing with his friends. At the age of 12, he's out with his friends. He is picked up by Charleston, South Carolina Police Department for the heinous crime of being outside after 7 p.m. while black. That was a crime. There was a curfew for African-American people, had to be back home by 7 o'clock. Robert Smalls was out with his friends. They wanted to stay out till 7:30. He said, I shouldn't be the only one that has to go home just because I have a different skin color than everybody else. And the cops came and got him and picked him up and brought him back to his mom. And his mom, she was getting a little nervous because Robert he's a little rebellious, and she's, she wants him to understand the situation, but, she also doesn't want him to get into serious trouble. So she decides she's going to help arrange something for him to where he can get him off of the plantation. She arranges, she gets the plantation owners to lease out Robert. And that is the term that they use, lease out Robert, to work on the docks in Charleston. So, he's from Beaufort, which is a little bit outside of Charleston. He gets sent into Charleston to work on the docks, working on ships and stuff, taking, carrying boxes off and on ships, working on steamers, that sort of thing. The deal with leasing out, and there's going to be a lot of problematic language that we have to use in this episode, and there's really no getting around it.
It's very problematic.
Yes. Yeah. But the idea here was that he was enslaved by the plantation, and the plantation made a deal with the dock to where Robert would work on the dock, and 95% of his pay would go to the owners of the plantation, and he would get $1 a week to do this job.
I feel like that's another piece of sort of the and maybe this makes the podcast, Ian, maybe it doesn't, but that's another piece of like the image of slavery that we don't often see, as like we usually are, it's the vision of, slaves in the fields, but like just in Charleston, this is more just like dock workers in Charleston.
Dock workers in Charleston that are not getting paid for their labor, and that money is actually, they are getting paid, but that money is all going to the people who quote unquote own them. And yeah, we've talked about, we said it in the open, badass is about like overcoming obstacles and fighting really hard, but there's no amount of work that you can do for $1 a week with all the rest of the money going to somebody else. Like, this is not a winning situation. This is not if you just worked hard, you could. It's
not a good deal for,
right. If you work hard,
Robert,
you can overcome this.
For sure.
This is not that kind of situation.
Yeah.
This is designed to not be that, right? This is institutionally designed to keep you down and to prevent you from succeeding. So, okay, Robert Smalls, he does this job. He makes $1 a week for 5 years, and he works hard. He moves up from, being a porter, moving boxes basically off and on ships, to getting to work onto the ships. He's a deckhand, which is like scrubbing the deck kind of thing. Then he gets on to some commercial steamers going in and out of the harbor. He starts understanding how learning about how the ships work, how to work on the ships, basically over the course of this 5 years, he goes from, hey, pick this up and carry this over here, to he understands the entire workings of a ship and what every person on that ship is doing in order to make it go. Okay.
Now there's something else that happens along the way, which I'm not sure if you were going to touch on, but he is pretty entrepreneurial also, from what I understand.
Yes.
And he's buying little cigarettes with the money he saves, and he's selling that for to save up money actually of his own. So he's actually managing to scrape together more than $1 a week.
Yes.
And he has a reason for that.
He does.
Which I will let you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he does. He starts trying to make more money, because what happens during that 5 years is that he meets a woman that was working at one of the hotels along the docks. And Robert Smalls, if you look at pictures of him as a younger man, he's a very attractive guy. And I think he had
I didn't look at any pictures. I read the story, but I didn't.
Yes, no, he looks like Donald. He looks like Childish Gambino. He's
okay.
So he's good. He meets this girl. He falls in love with her. They get married. They rent an apartment on the docks in Charleston, and they have 2 kids. And he's still bringing home that $1 a week. Like you said, he's trying to invest that or trade that or buy and sell. He's doing whatever he can with that $1 to support a wife, 2 kids, pay his rent, put food on the table, all of that stuff. But
so from what I actually had, what I read and heard, because I listened to an interview with his grandson a few years back, was that his wife, the woman he met, was also a slave.
Yes.
And was owned by someone else, and he had struck a deal to buy her.
Exactly. And so that's where we're going with this, because it's not happily married life. Like, he's supporting, he does have to pay their bills, right? He does have to pay for his family to have their house and their food and all of that stuff. But but
also
is quote unquote owned by a different family than he is. And by extension, her children that she has with Robert Smalls are also owned by her people. And so this means that at any given moment, either Robert's owner or his wife's owner, and I hesitate to use these words, but I don't have a better one.
Yeah, I mean, that's it.
Yeah, either his owner or his wife's owner could decide to sell either of them or any of their kids, and there was nothing that either of these people could legally do about it. Oh, sorry, your kid's been sold to a different place. Oh, your wife's been sold, so she's moving to Georgia. Bye, sorry. And so Smalls wants to basically buy his wife and children's freedom. And he goes to her owner and says, I want to buy my wife's freedom so she can stay with me and my kids can stay with me. And he says, yeah, no problem. I will sell you your wife and kids for $800. Which,
do the math on that.
Right. He's making $1 a week. He's maybe turning that into $2 a week. And also, you can do that, that inflation calculator of what is $800 a week now? It's probably $10 million or something at this point.
Well, and I think the $800 was just for his wife, not for his kids either.
Great,
I think
even
that
better,
was more for them. So
So, all right. Well, that's the plan. Let's try to make that work, I guess. Then 1861 rolls around, and the first shots of the Civil War are fired on Fort Sumter, the U.S. base on the island of Fort Sumter off the coast of Charleston, are fired upon by the guns of Charleston. And Robert Smalls is 22 years old. All of this stuff has happened before his 22nd birthday.
Oh, wow.
He is, or before his 23rd birthday. He is 22 years old when the Civil War begins, and he could probably see the explosions at Fort Sumter from his apartment. So the Civil War happens literally in his backyard on the dock that he works at. And Sumter's one of the two forts that guard Charleston Harbor, and he's there and he watches it start. Okay.
That's certainly notable.
Yes. And so he's got, at this point, he's got 5 or 6 years.
Things are about to change for Robert Smalls.
Things are about to change there's an opportunity knocking.
Yeah.
So he's 22, but he's got many years of experience rigging, sailing, working on ships. And so, when the war begins, he is pressed into service to fight for the South in the Civil War, which is literally like the side that wants to keep him enslaved.
Yeah.
But he is also enslaved by that side. And they are saying, hey, you can work on a ship. You are going to work on this ship now. And they
weren't exactly asking nicely.
Like, no, there's no legal recourse against
this.
Yeah, you are going to do this, or you're going to go to jail, and so is your entire family, right? Or worse. Okay, so he's pressed into service aboard the Confederate ship Planter. The name of the ship is the CSS Planter. It is a converted cotton steamer, so it's a steamship that would just transport cotton in and out of Charleston Harbor. He knew it because he'd been working on it for a long time. But instead of shipping cotton now, it's being transformed into a supply ship for food, ammunition, and medical supplies, going from the Charleston docks to various forts in and around South Carolina that are defending the harbor. So because he is African American, he is not allowed to be the ship's pilot. So they create a job for him called the wheelman, which is not the pilot, but does everything that the pilot did. And I kind of like this because wheelman is also what you call like the getaway driver on like a bank robbery. I think of like Baby Driver,
yeah. Yeah.
Wheelman sounds way cooler than pilot.
It's fitting. It's fitting in this case.
Yes. And so, so he is the wheelman on the Planter, and he does an awesome job of sailing the ship. And one thing about the Civil War is that the Confederacy didn't have nearly the Navy that the North had. So the Union Navy is much bigger, and they want to create this blockade to basically cut off the South's access to trade with Europe or South America or any of the other. It's basically like blockade them in navally. So the Planter's job is to deliver supplies, but a lot of what they're doing is running through this blockade. And so his job is to basically like avoid the Union blockade, and he's good at it. And he works on this ship at the early parts of the war, and he does really well. Okay. There is also this thing though, where like he is kind of fighting for the side that wants to keep him enslaved against the side that is suggesting that maybe he should not be enslaved. So, he's got that in the back of his mind at most times of his life. And as he's starting to make the rounds, sailing between all of the forts in Charleston Harbor, you've got Fort Wagner, you've got Fort Sumter, you've got all these other forts. He's delivering ammo and supplies and stuff to them. He starts making mental notes, troop placements, troop movements, various currents, tides, most importantly, like the signals and codes they're being sent between the ship and the forts that are going around on the harbor. And he's making notes of all of this stuff. And so for 9 months, he works on CSS Planter, and he's waiting and he's watching and he's gathering intelligence. And every time he leaves port to go on one of these missions, he tells his wife to pack a bag and be ready to go at any moment's notice. If I find the opportunity to get out of here, you need to be ready. So while I'm out on the boat, we'll see. We're going to make a break for it, but you just be ready. So his wife has this go bag, and she's ready to go at a moment's notice. And he is planning what I think will be one of the most badass escape attempts ever undertaken by anybody. All he needs is the right moment. And on a quiet night in May 1862, he finds that moment. We're going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about how Robert Smalls escapes, or makes an attempt to escape, Charleston Harbor. It is May 13, 1862. Robert Smalls has been working on the CSS Planter for several months now, through the entirety of the Civil War, being, on a crew that's ferrying supplies to and from the many forts. There's two big ones, but there's a lot of forts that dot Charleston Harbor. The CSS Planter's crew and its officers were all white, but Robert Smalls and 7 other enslaved people also work aboard the ship. And, on the night of the 13th of May, there's been a long shift. They've been ferrying supplies and weapons to and from. The ship puts in at one of the little islands in Charleston Harbor, and they're going to sleep there for the night. It's around 2 a.m., and the captain, he's worn out. He orders his crew to make camp on the beach and grab some sleep. So they set up their tents, they make a fire, whatever, they can get some sleep. Smalls says, you guys go camp on the shore. I'll stay on the boat with the other slaves. We'll keep the ship prepped, keep it up and running. In case we need to leave in a hurry, the Union shows up, we'll be ready to go.
Good. You take a break, man. You go offshore. We got this.
And as soon as the captain and the crew were asleep, he stole the steamboat. Okay. Now, it's a steamboat with a giant charcoal broiler. It is not quiet. It is not like he slipped away in a canoe. Like he started the he started the engines on the steamboat and pushed it away, but he still is able to get away from the island. And these guys are now marooned on this island. Like, they will eventually be able to wave to somebody in the morning to say, hey, help. But no amount of screaming is going to be heard across Charleston Harbor. They're on this.
To be clear, yeah, he's not doing this alone, though. He has a on-board crew.
Yes,
of
he has
other
7 other guys on the ship, and they're all enslaved people who have been forced to work on this ship.
Yeah,
but they all understand how the ship works. They've all been crew on this ship for a long time. They get it. They can run this ship in their sleep, and they do. Yeah. They're driving this at night with no light. They're running it with no lights, right? Because they can't. They're not supposed to. They're stealing the thing, so they got to turn all the lights off and stuff, right? They're navigating this through treacherous waterways in the dark. And
this is one of those I'm the captain now.
I am the captain now, yes.
Yeah.
Look at me.
Yeah. Look at me. I'm the captain now.
Yes. And so he steals the ship, but instead of bolting for open water, they sail back to the docks at Charleston, which is the wrong direction. They're heading back into the heart. Charleston is the heart of, it's where the war started. It's the center of the Confederacy. And he heads there with these other guys. They pull into the port in Charleston Harbor. And, at this point, they are slave mutineers. This is punishable by death. They are not they have decided they are going to make this break for it, and there is no turning back. But they go to Charleston Harbor, they stop there, and him and his crew leave the boat to go get their families. So these 8 guys run off the docks, go get their families. Hey, I hope you have that bag packed. If you don't, forget it. Just leave it. You're coming with me. So not long after this, 17 people reboard the ship and slip away. So you've got the guys that were working the crew, and you've got their wives and kids on the boat now. And they sail away. They got to make it 10 miles, and there's at least 5 Confederate forts between them and open water. Okay. Smalls gets his crew together, and the Planter is a supply ship, but it has cannons. It's got 6 guns on it, and so he loads them. Cannons are loaded. Muskets are loaded. We're going to make it out of here, or we're all going to die trying, because if we get captured, we're dead anyway. So, I don't want to hang in town square in Charleston I'd rather fight until I die. So they load their weapons and they start to head. Yeah, they start to head out. And, if they're discovered, he's just going to fight until he dies. So, he even positions a guy who gives a guy a job that's like, look, if we're not going to make it and like we're losing and they're going to board the ship, your job is to blow the boiler and blow the ship up. Just kill us all, right? Like it's kind of like a suicide pact. We're going to get out of here together. It's like the Thelma and Louise. We're going to get out of here or we're going to all die trying, right?
Yeah.
Butch Cassidy. And okay, so this is it. It's a one-way trip and they're either going to get out of here or they're going to blow themselves up. Nobody on the ship is going back to the life they had before. They are free people now, and they are going to die free people one way or the other. Okay, so they start arriving at the first Confederate security checkpoint. Robert Smalls is piloting a ship crewed by 17 enslaved people, many of whom are women and children. And he is known to these sentries. He is the wheelman on this boat. He is the guy who is supposed to be behind the wheel of CSS Planter while it's driving around. He's the guy that's been delivering weapons and ammo and whiskey and medical supplies to these forts.
So they're just like, "Hi, Bob."
And hey Bob, what's up? He's like, "Hey guys, what's going on? I'm just delivering my stuff. You know what it is? I'm on a secret mission tonight. I'm running the Union blockade because I got to deliver some weapons to nearby rebel camps." And it works. And he does this 5 times, and all 5 times over the course of this night, he's able to talk his way through. He's able to pass his bluff check and talk his way through these security checkpoints, and he makes it out into open water. And now all that's left is the Union blockade is not that far off the coast of Charleston. They're trying to prevent ships from coming in and out of Charleston Harbor, so they've surrounded it with warships. They don't have enough guns. There's so many forts in the harbor that the Union can't just attack the harbor. They don't have enough ships for that, but they do have enough to catch any ships that are coming in and out. So all he's got to do is find one of these ships.
Or alternatively sink a ship that might be coming towards them that they don't,
Right, yes. There is also the idea that this is a Confederate transport ship that is sailing directly towards the Union blockade.
Yeah.
And there is a Union frigate out there waiting for them, wooden warship, and it is running its guns out. It opens all the gun decks and it runs all the guns out and it begins to elevate them and it begins to target range and stuff. And the Union commander on the ship, he's looking through his telescope and he's trying to, give range numbers and speed numbers, position heading to the artillery crews. And he can see on the deck of CSS Planter a white flag waving very proudly. And he says,
I will tell you. Well, I'll tell you what I read before you get to that. Was that, or no, what I had heard from the interview with Robert Smalls' grandson was that Robert had planned for everything up to that point.
Yes.
And the white flag actually was something that his wife had luckily had on hand, was some white cloth so she provided that because they were not prepared.
I'm about to get vaporized by a broadside.
Honey.
Did you forget the white flag?
Damn it, Bob.
I have to think of everything.
Yeah.
And
what would we do without our wives?
Yes. Oh my God.
Get blown up by the Union. Clearly.
Get blown up by the Union. Yeah. Get blown up by the people you were trying to help. So his wife, Hannah Smalls, she is the one that remembers to bring the white flag, which is very important because they would have been blown up without it. Okay. So the frigate picks up the crew. And as Robert Smalls is pulled aboard the Federal ship, he says something to the effect of like, "Good morning, sir. I've brought you some of your guns back." And that's it. So 17 people and a 6-gun warship are delivered to the Union. And the story becomes national news in the North. Robert Smalls he gets in the newspapers all across the North. He's kind of he's a bit of a national hero. And there is some speculation that his story helped contribute to opening up positions for Black soldiers in the Union Army, which is something that starts happening very soon after this incident. They begin recruiting. One of the first units is, of course, the 54th Massachusetts. If you guys have seen Glory, which you should, because it's amazing.
Incredible.
That unit starts getting recruited very shortly after this incident. So Robert Smalls, he starts going on public speaking tours throughout the northern states, and he starts trying to recruit Black soldiers to fight in the war effort. I don't know where
how did the South react to this story?
They were not happy. They were not excited about this idea, and but much as many of the things that happened in Robert Small's life were beyond his control, this was something that was beyond their control.
This is like this guy, hero of the north, hero to the north, and in the South, they're like not so popular, I can imagine.
Not such a popular story there, but did not make the front page news in the South, but it did in the North. And he starts traveling around and he starts doing talks. And I don't know where they get this number from, but he's credited with securing the enrollment of 5,000 African-American soldiers in the war. But he's out now, but he's not interested in doing speaking tours. He wants to do something to help fight this war. Okay, so less than a year after he had that dramatic escape from Charleston Harbor, he comes back. He returns to Charleston Harbor at the command of a warship. And not just any warship, the USS Planter, which is literally the same ship he had just stolen from the Confederacy.
Perfect.
A 6-gun warship as part of the Union blockade fleet enters Charleston Harbor in 1863. And Robert Smalls is commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy. He participates in 17 military actions in and around Charleston Harbor between 1863 and 1865.
Wow. I mean, who better to captain the USS Planter than Robert Smalls, obviously.
And that specialized knowledge I was talking about, the currents, the tides, the depth, the channels in which you can sail large ships. He has all of that committed to memory. And that's very useful information for the Union when they're about to attack Charleston Harbor. Damn the torpedoes. That's an attack on Charleston Harbor. So he is fighting aboard the Planter. And at one point, he even pilots a U.S. Navy ironclad, the USS Keokuk, when it attacks Fort Sumter in April 1863 to retake it back from the Confederacy. There is a battle not long after that called the Battle of Folly Creek. It's in June of 1863. And at that battle, he is piloting the Planter. He's not in command of the ship, but he is the wheelman, as he has always been. This is his ship, and he knows it, and he can sail it through these waters with his eyes closed. The ship comes under attack from the guns at Fort Wagner and so Confederate ships and forts are firing on the Planter as part of a Union attack on this area. And the Planter's captain, he gets a little shell-shocked because there's a huge amount of fire coming in on him. And the captain basically runs and hides in the boiler room. And, the thought was, for most warships is that you would surrender at this point because you have enemy ships and you have enemy cannons and all this stuff firing in on you. But for Robert Smalls, there are stories coming out of what happens. Black soldiers are fighting in the Civil War, and they are not being treated as prisoners of war if they are captured in battle. There are stories coming out of bad things happening to African-American soldiers for the North if they get captured by the Confederacy. And Robert Smalls is not the kind of guy he's not going back, right? He's not going to go back into slavery. He's not going to be hanged as whatever bad thing is going to happen. No, he has already committed that he's going to fight until death to avoid going back to this. And so when the captain goes and hides, he takes over the ship. And he's like, we are going to fight until we die. And he actually fights the Planter out of this attack and does some damage to the Confederate ships that are attacking him. And it's worth mentioning that this Battle of Folly Creek is actually in support of the attack on Fort Wagner, which is the finale of that movie Glory we were just talking about, where the 54th Massachusetts attacks the Fort Wagner in Charleston Harbor. So he's in the Union Navy helping to support that attack when it happens. He's firing cannons at the fort, stuff like that. Okay. His heroism at this battle and throughout the 17 military actions that he participates in Charleston Harbor earn him medals for bravery. He is promoted to a captain in the Navy, which is a very high rank in the Navy. He earns a salary of $150 a month, which is better than $1 a week.
Significant improvement.
Yes, 150x or whatever.
Yeah.
He's actually ends up being one of the highest paid African American soldiers of the Civil War.
Wow.
And one of the highest ranking. And so he is actually standing on the deck of USS Planter when Charleston surrenders to the Union in April 1865 at the end of the Civil War. His naval actions are in support of William Sherman's March to the Sea, and Charleston surrenders in April 1865, and he's there to watch it. He watched the opening battle of the Civil War, and he watched the surrender of Charleston.
He's like, he looks at it and he says, "I did that."
I did that. Yeah, I helped.
Yeah.
Right. And after the war, he is appointed brigadier general, and he actually. He actually returns home with his wife and kids back to Beaufort. And by like return home, I mean like he literally buys the plantation house that he grew up in.
It's a bold move.
A bold move.
I like it.
He buys the house. He buys the plantation house that he grew up in, and he permits the family to remain there.
Oh. Okay.
You guys can stay.
Yeah.
But
all
it's
right.
mine now. I'm the captain.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the landlord now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's okay. Rent's due on the 3rd, but if you get it to me by the 5th, it's fine. So he opens a store to help freedmen kind of, they sell things at a very steep discount for freedmen to get on their feet. He opens a school for Black students. He starts a newspaper called the Southern Standard, and he gets into politics because he is famous. Like his story, he is not some kind of like unrecognized guy fighting in this war. Like he was front page news when he escaped, and he's a brigadier general. Like that's no small thing. He is still national news. He gets elected to the first South Carolina State Senate, which
all right. Yeah.
Like you said, you're like, oh, that story's probably not that popular in the South, but he gets elected to the state Senate. And then after
South Carolina.
And then he becomes a representative for the U.S. House of Representatives in 1874. He gets 80% of the vote from his district.
Wow.
And becomes a state senator. So, yeah. And that's
he became a congressman.
Congressman. Yeah. House of Representatives. Yeah. He's a congressman. He's a state senator. And then after that becomes a U.S. congressman.
Wow.
And he stays in politics for most of his life. He dies in 1880 at the age of 75. He is on the Congress he is on the state Senate that approves and helps ratify the 14th Amendment, which abolishes slavery. So Robert Smalls, born enslaved in just the worst of all possible situations, steals a warship, escapes with it, uses that same warship to come back and attack his hometown, then gets elected to Congress by the people of that town and uses that power to pass a law that abolishes slavery.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's
as good as it gets.
Robert Smalls. That's the thing that you really can't distill down into a 4-line meme or contain within a 28-day month. This is a badass for all seasons, as we've said. This is the story of Robert Smalls. This is a guy who could not have possibly had the odds stacked harder against him, and yet
that is what I describe as a true like American hero.
Yes. At all turns of his life, there were people actively trying to kill him, and he thought through various times throughout his history, through probably most of his life, He thought, like, if I don't succeed, I'm gonna die, and he made it happen. And that's awesome. That's badass.
So where's the movie? that's what we need.
Get that thing together. Send me the script. I'll finish it off for you. We'll get it together. High Five Productions presents Robert Small's movie. We'll do it. Me and Andrew, we can knock this thing out in a weekend.
Yeah. Danny Glover apparently
he would crush it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, he has a famous quote that I think is worth maybe mentioning. He said that, he's quoted as saying, "My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be the equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life." I think that is a phenomenal sort of quote, and I think you have to think about it, because it is the key part in my mind when I hear that is giving people an equal chance.
Yes.
You gotta let people get on put them at the same starting block at the same time.
Gotta give them a fighting chance, right? Like,
yeah,
sure, people can overcome a situation in which, like this, where it's impossible, right? But
that's not where people should be starting. That's for sure.
That's an outlier, right? It's an outlier, and it's
yeah.
You gotta give people a fair shot, right? And and he's right. So that is the story of Robert Smalls. That is Badass of the Week, and we are so happy that you guys went on this journey with us, and hopefully you will continue to go on these journeys with us in the future as we keep on making badass episodes. This episode and the memes and all that stuff, this was a story that I had never encountered until I had seen those memes and had people send me those emails. So we don't we are kind of always grateful to have your input on people you think we should be writing about and people you want to hear about, and maybe some stories that might not be as common knowledge but should be and can be through, like you said, relentless promotion, which is possible. So send us your ideas. We'd love to hear them. Please like and subscribe to the show. Send us comments who you think we should talk about. We'll definitely take it under advisement and try to get to them. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.